All right, a very warm afternoon to everyone here. So I have the privilege of having three very distinguished gentlemen who are actually no strangers to each other. I think that's what's unique perhaps for this panel. They're not meeting for the first time. They've actually corresponded, some virtually, I think for years, but never met. But this is a panel of individuals, deep expertise, practitioners in the field, and we have the privilege of having all of them here in person, and just hope to be able to share their learnings, their experience with all of you over here. So without further ado, I'll just start off the panel with a quick introduction of what we're trying to achieve here. So the panel is about unlocking, I guess, TradFi with DeFi. You may have heard, if you attended the morning session with our Deputy Prime Minister, Wong, speaking about, I guess, Project Guardian. We have a separate media release speaking about Project Guardian. So Project Guardian really is a collaborative effort, initiative by the MAS to look at the potential for asset tokenization and institutional DeFi. So for this panel, we'll be speaking about some of the motivations behind some of the efforts, and also just more broadly speaking about the lessons and experience that they have, not just in Singapore, but globally as well. So I'm going to start off with perhaps with the first question, actually. I'll start off with actually Uma, just speaking about this topic about digital assets and the adoption from a financial institution's perspective. So Uma, maybe you could start things off just from maybe from a TradFi perspective, or if you could just share with the audience from your perspective, what are the broader opportunities that you see in this space, as well as the risk and the implications of adopting digital assets and DeFi, and how is JPM responding to these developments?
So, Alan, first of all, thanks for having me, and I'm so glad to be back in Singapore. Actually, I was here exactly 3 years ago for the same thing, and that was the last time I traveled to Singapore before, I think a small health thing came up globally. But, and the other thing I want to apologize for on behalf of all three of us is I think we are very overdressed after the last panel. I think, we saw people walking off, but I can assure you we're not as uncool as we look in suits. So, so we'll go with that. But on a serious note, I think when you think about DeFi, lessons learned for TradFi and things like that, I think fundamentally it is an opportunity for us to reassess how infrastructure works end-to-end, all assets. Because if you really think about it, I think we've created, I know some of our regulatory friends are not going to be thrilled about it, and hopefully there's not a lot of US regulators in the room. But we've created securities, we've created commodities, we've created cash, we've created all these financial instruments, which essentially are all a future cash flow stream. So, you can call certain things certain instruments. But I think what DeFi and blockchain and tokenization gives us the opportunity is to standardize the actual data representation of these things and possibly have them on the same rails. So you can essentially put tokens, no matter what they are, on a single infrastructure that allows you to actually create value in ways that we cannot do today. So just by virtue of the fact that you have to trade, say, some kind of asset, and let's say it's $100 million, you go to a DBS or you go to a JPM or someone like us and go, I want to trade it for $100 million. Then the wire goes in, someone has to confirm it. There's all kinds of stuff going on. But the ability to actually then swap that token in an instant atomically creates new markets, new opportunities. So I think there's a lot of upside purely from an infrastructure rewrite point of view. And you can create new asset classes, you can create no more flexibility, much more capital street. So I think from a TradFi point of view, there's tons and tons of upside. From a JP Morgan point of view, I think our journey in this space started now 7 years ago, maybe even a little bit more, with a couple of people whose task was to, hey, there's this cool thing called Ethereum just came up, maybe it'll be interesting, maybe it won't be interesting, and can you just mess around with it? And that team has now grown up to, more than 200 people globally who do this full time. And we are very focused on tokenization. That ended up becoming our, business unit that's called Onyx. And in that, we basically just think about it very differently. We think about disrupting the world, disrupting financial infrastructure, and actually partnering with our peers. So there's no such thing as something that's owned by one bank in this space. So we have, for instance, launched Partier with our friends at DBS. We've been working with SBI. So all of these are collaborative projects. So I think that's why it's just a fundamental rethink of everything.
All right, thanks, Uma. Maybe turning over to you then, Kwee Juan, if you can just speak to the audience here, your perspective about the opportunities and perhaps some of the risk and the areas that challenges that Umar has mentioned.
No, I think first and foremost, I just wanted to thank everybody for being in this room. I think it must be a combination of our presence and as well as what DPM Wong said this morning, and so all of you come. So we were just joking with Alan to say that he should have given us the other room, which is much bigger so that everybody can be comfortable. But also, I must also say that, you know, the crowd that we see here just reminds me of when I was in Texas in June for Consensus, but they didn't have a room this full. So, you know, I think they give credit to everybody for your interest. I agree with Umar. I think the opportunity that we see from tokenized assets is really to represent it in a digital form that allows the technology, which is blockchain and smart contract, for it to be embedded and thereby getting the efficiency that you see via a blockchain. But clearly, when you look at it from a risk perspective, there are, you know, other things that you got to get familiar with. I think key among them that you will hear increasingly is this idea of smart contract auditing, because all things are going to be programmable on smart contract. And when you program stuff on smart contract, like all of you would know, there could be bugs that are in there. You got to make sure that it is done properly. And that's one area. The other area, which I think all of you are very familiar with, is this whole risk of AML, CFT risk. And that in itself happens when you have wallets that are anonymized. So you do not know who you're trading with. And so there can be a lot of illicit activity that happens in the DeFi protocol. And that's what you saw this year in a lot of the illicit activities that took place, and many of it happened within DeFi protocol. So clearly in this project that we have, we do think about these risks and how do we address them. And I think part of the project that we've done was also to think about them and think about what could be the solutions and try to execute them. And I think that's why it's so exciting from this project.
So Fernando, turning over to you. You're CEO of SBI Digital Asset Holdings,
Yep.
but also you are a techie at heart. So if I could ask you that question then, what can TradFi really learn from DeFi?
First, you mentioned I'm the techie, maybe the geeky in this panel, but the last time I was in a panel with Umar, I broke my microphone, right? So I did a stress test on my microphone. I'll try it again. Let's see whether it breaks or not. But you know, going back to your question, I do agree with what Umar said. The potential here is huge, right? You look at the digitalization process that is going on, in finance, and when you do some mental exercise and to try to figure out what things are going to look like 10, 20 years down the road, you come up with the, frictionless financial services, right? Instantaneous payments cross-border. Global identity services that would enable you to onboard it for any service like within microseconds, right? And by looking at the great work that all the innovators in blockchain and DeFi are doing, basically you get to get a peek into what the future is going to look like, right? You can see, wow, I can do a payment using Bitcoin, cross-border, instantaneous. I can go to DeFi pool and borrow some crypto, use that crypto to do some kind of financial transaction. So on paper, everything looks great. It's, wow, this is the future, right? And all the banks, as part of the data transformation journey, it should be heading towards that. But then this comes back to what Kuyan said. When you try to get your hands dirty and see, wow, let's see how we can actually put this in production at SBI. Because I look at myself, and I'm pretty sure Kuyan and Umar have the same feeling. We suffer an embarrassment of riches. We have the tech, we have all the licenses in Singapore, US, Japan, many other jurisdictions. It feels like it should be easy, right? But then when you look at it and you realize, wow, this becomes mainstream, then this is a utility. So it's a source of potential systematic risk. So maybe we should put some kind of, risk controls in place. Or maybe we should, add a governance layer on top. And when you go down the road, all of a sudden it starts to look like TradFi. All of a sudden, you end up where we are today, right? So honestly, I think that the challenge here for a DeFi that is showing the future, we literally getting to see the future, is what kind of risk controls we need to put in place, how we need to reimagine business processes, workflow, so that I feel comfortable with my, my daughter or my wife using DeFi services. I'll be honest with you, I'm not okay with my daughter playing with DeFi today. We are not quite there yet, but we are willing to give it a try, and the proof is in the pudding. And that's why the three of us we decided to move all our organizations and try to actually do it.
So I think maybe one thing I would add is on the risk side, the one thing which crypto does quite a bit, and DeFi does as well, is reinvent finance. So this is like a very fast reinvention of all the stuff we already have invented. So someone comes up and they do margin lending, and then they think it's something brand new, but it's been done before. Or someone starts doing swaps, have been done before. Most of the stuff has been done before, and a lot of mistakes have been made.
Correct.
A lot of them by institutions like the ones on the stage, but other institutions as well. So I think we are in a rapid cycle of repeating all the mistakes. So I'm hoping that what we saw earlier this year is like a mini 2008, and we're now done. And we're not going to see a real 2008, because I think what you also see from DeFi is people are interlocking these things, creating leverage upon leverage upon leverage. So I think in some ways you have lots of innovation, but I do hope sometimes that the innovators are also learning from the lessons of history, by the way, not old history, but the last 20, 30 years, where a lot of financial disasters have actually come and gone. So I think that's the real risk in DeFi. From our point of view, is as these protocols grow, they are public, they are open, people are playing around with them, and you can end up losing a lot of money for yourself and more importantly for other people.
So staying on you, Umar, just for a bit, just to build on that point. So from your perspective, how different is this institutional DeFi that you're looking at? How different is this from maybe more classic, traditional DeFi in that sense?
So can you clarify, like institutional DeFi in terms
As in terms of what you're doing with Guardian versus...
Yeah, I think so. For Project Guardian, I think there's some magic sauce in there. So what we went in with Guardian was, can you do DeFi? Of course, everyone's doing DeFi. There's probably a bunch of people in the room who've done like token swaps and lending, and I'm sure a lot of people have lost some money, so I'm sorry for that. But I think when you think about what is it that the bank or a bank needs to do from a regulatory point of view and from a customer point of view. We need to protect our customers. We cannot lose their money. You can't just go back and say, oh, by the way, I'm sorry I lost the key, but better luck next time. Or I put your tokens in there, and then someone just hacked the bridge and went away with it. I mean, we are liable for it. So the two critical aspects that then come together is, one is identity, or some notion of identity. And by the way, all of three of us on the stage probably have slightly different approaches on how we are going about identity. Some NFTs, we are doing verifiable credentials, but either ways you need an identity solution, because without an identity solution, which in some ways verifies who the human being is that is interacting and what they're allowed to do, it just will never fly in traditional finance. Just can't scale. So I think one is identity. The second thing is tokenizing things that are well understood. So, in our case, we were tokenizing deposits. By the way, that was, I think, the first time that any institution, to my knowledge, has tokenized actual bank deposits on a blockchain, on public blockchain, ever. So that was a big positive, because we really believe that the future here, you will have coexistence of different digital assets. You will have CBDCs, you will have stable coins, you will have crypto, you will have tokenized deposits, and possibly other things like so other instruments. So I think those are things that come together. So from our point of view, safety, security, cyber protection, sort of making sure the funds are safe is the primary objective. The experimentation is a secondary objective. So I think that's how we thought about it.
All right. So Umar, you spoke about tokenized, I guess, assets, financial assets, as opposed to maybe more crypto. They are unbacked assets. You spoke about permissioning, identity. Maybe building on that, turning it over to Quidran, for example. Maybe from your perspective, then, what's the path towards making this real, right? What else should we be considering?
No, I think, just to give the context of what Guardian is, because I don't think we have explained it. Yeah. What we have essentially done was we said, can we change the way trading is being done and how trading is being done between banks through the OTC market? Traditionally, not traditionally, but currently, what is being done is banks will contact each other electronically, and then they agree on a price, they trade. But behind that, you have a whole series of other intermediaries, such as your corresponding bank who manage the currency, such as US dollars or Japanese yen or Sing dollars. And then you have custodian banks who deal with the securities that gets traded. And then in between, you might find a few broker dealers in the process. And that is a lot of people. So what we wanted to do with Guardian was essentially to say, can we reimagine that and use smart contract and blockchain to intersect with each other, to interact with each other, and trade those transactions programmatically through smart contract, using the principles of DeFi and using automated market maker to do it. And as what Umar said, in order to make this really work for the real world, for banks to come in, you got to make sure that it is permission. We got to know who we're trading with. And so solving for that was important. And then what we also wanted to do was we want to make sure that it can be scaled. It cannot be a blockchain that is built privately. So hence we did it on Polygon to make sure and prove that it can be done on a public chain, but with the right privacy on data, and achieve the atomic trading, settlement, clearing, and custody, 4 in 1. And that's quite incredible for us to say that that can be done, and we have exactly achieved that. So when you look at that being done and to bring it to the broader economy or the rest of the players, we now have to convince the rest of the market participants that this is something that they are comfortable with, but also at the same time, all of us have also decided to say all our trading systems don't generate smart contracts, right? So how do you then deal with trading systems to generate smart contracts who then get into DeFi pool to trade, and then the reverse comes out once the trade is done, it gets back into the system for recording. We have thought through that and went through that journey with our respective organization so that we can then share with the industry, and that will accelerate the whole adoption, because people will begin to understand, how do I get from where I am today to what this could promise, and what this promises is trading and operational efficiency, and it will also help to manage counterparty and credit risk as a result of it. So that's really, really quite exciting from what we're doing here. And by telling this to the rest of the marketplace and telling them our experiences, hopefully we can bring them on board to come and experiment at even a bigger scale with more participants in the pool.
So maybe onto that, you don't mind, Alan. I think that DeFi can bring to finance what cloud brought to compute. Now it's super easy to get your website or even a full-fledged, web service, Web 3.0, 3.0, you name it, because you just go to AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Compute, you name it. You spin off a few VMs. You don't need to have your own data centers with smart hands. You don't need to worry about all of that. Just focus on your value proposition. And I think DeFi has the potential to give you that. You can easily deploy a new financial service, right? Once you have the planning in place, mainly identity, then you can onboard new clients, right? It should be transparent. Why focus on the nitty-gritty, all the gory details? And if there's this foundation, DeFi base, that would allow you to focus on the value proposition. At the end of the day, you're trying to provide a new business, right? Or a new service. And adding to Umar said, I think identity is going to play a key role, but I think the challenge here is there are too many standards. You have the OpenID Foundation, W3C, there are quite a few players. So I also think that, people like us, right, once we reach a critical mass of like-minded people who want to make this happen, and only then we'll be able to have a meaningful scale, right? And basically whatever we chose to use becomes the de facto standard. So I think I'm speaking for the whole team that we are willing to engage with the wider industry to reach that critical mass, because things don't just happen, right? I told you the future looks pretty cool. I think DeFi is giving us a peek into the future, which is fine, but I believe in agency. Things won't just happen, right? So it has to do all the non-sexy stuff, and I think that's what the focus of Guardian has been, at least for me. It was not about the tech. My guys, the CTO, they had all the fun, but it was, the likes of Quijan, Umar, and myself who had to get our hands dirty, literally, in some cases.
Yeah. So I think one thing I would add to both their points is this was very, very hard. Now, as simple as it sounds, this was probably the most work we've ever done for a single transaction, at JP Morgan at least.
Yep.
Last night we had a Guardian celebration party for the Onyx team, and there was about 20 people in the room. That was only the tip of the team, because obviously there's a bunch of team which is in India and London and New York that wasn't able to travel here at this time. But these people spend countless hours. Now, the reason to spend those countless hours is not because DeFi has not been done before, but when you do it in a fully regulated end-to-end environment, we are writing the trade in our systems, they are acknowledging it. How do you do smart contract? We did a smart contract audit, which By the way, I mean, I didn't realize that it would be like 40 pages, but it was very long. So, everything end to end was tested. So it was done as if we were going to go into production tomorrow, which obviously will be a longer process. But this is a very hard thing to do in a regulated institution.
So Uma, if we could just break this down for the audience, what did you exactly do for the benefit of the audience? If you could just break it down further.
So I think from our point of view,
for the live trade, yeah.
So for the live trade, so I think everything, so we basically had to obviously pick the right protocol, which we did for Polygon. I mean, there's multiple, but that's one we picked. We had to figure out how to build the right smart contracts, how to audit them in a regulated environment, what they do, are they going to be broken, are they, because people will see them. By the way, usually banks do not have things that are exposed to people. Everything is behind a cyber wall at JP Morgan, everything is behind a cyber wall at DBS or SBI. You don't see what the code is. In this case, we are putting code. You can actually go to Polygon and read the smart contracts that we put out there. So that creates a whole different level of like cyber risk. Then we had to figure out how our internal systems, to Kwijuan's point, are going to actually record this transaction. How do you record it? How do you book it? What are all the systems that need to touch? What do they even call this thing? Because it's a DeFi trade. We had to work with the Aave protocol in the middle to say, can they do it with our identity solution where only certain people could go into the pool? And then we had to, so the list just goes on and on and on. And each of these steps was taking hundreds and hundreds of person hours to do it right.
Yeah.
Because from our point of view, the next phase is not like now let's try to do 2 transactions. The next phase is let's go have a serious discussion on how this goes live.
Yeah. I would like to that to our, if you don't mind, Alan, that I think this applies to JP Morgan, DBS, and also SBI, but people say here JP Morgan, DBS, SBI are simply a single entity, right? In many cases, there were quite a number of entities involved, right? It could be a bank, a trust bank, a broker-dealer, you name it, and there are Chinese walls between those entities, right? So you cannot tell them, oh, please do this for me because I want to do this DeFi thing for the Singapore FinTech Festival. I want to have a drink with Umar. That doesn't fly, right? All these entities have their own processes, committees. Everything has to be done arm's length. So even before you try to reach out to beyond our respective teams, right? Even within our organizations, right? There's a lot of learning. There's a lot of buy-in that you need to get, and I think we should not underestimate that because there is a reason for those Chinese walls to be there. Right? So that needs to be respected.
For you and us, we obviously don't have MAS as a regulator, which I know is not an easy regulator, but at least it's a local regulator.
So that's the reason why I kept so quiet when you talk about regulators.
From
because we're doing it in Singapore, and I've got Alan, who is a co-sponsor on a project. But I think joking aside, what is really quite interesting from our discovery, other than mapping out all these, we call it journeys, in getting these trades done, what we also realized was for all the positioning that we hear out there on DeFi protocols, and if you look at the automated market maker pricing mechanism that they use to price these transactions, they're actually quite rudimentary.
Yep.
When you compare that against the kind of trades that is done in TradFi or in the OTC market between banks today, the pricing mechanism is a lot more complex. Yep. The trades are a lot more complex than the simplistic swaps that you see that are out there. This is no offense to all the companies who have done such great work out there in creating AMM as a concept, but in terms of scaling, for it to go into industrializing for the institutional market, that needs to improve. And that is something that we discovered that needs to be worked on and do a much better job in pricing. And how do you make sure that that works with the pricing that you see on Bloomberg or Refinity, and how do you get price oracles between the two and flow that? So there's still a lot of reimagination on that front, on top of what we have collectively done to think about how do you even get a trade done.
So I'm going to change gear a bit. I see there are some audience questions. I think 2 questions I'm going to pose. One, I'm going to ask Uma about tokenized deposit. I think there's interest in that. What's the motivation for that? And then maybe I'm turning over to Kwijuan, if you could answer a bit about the permissioning piece, because I think you mentioned that earlier on. And would be good to understand as well from Fernando, just broadly speaking on identity and standards. So if I can turn over to Uma first on tokenized deposits.
So we are big believers that essentially, if you think about how money works in the current infrastructure, you have central bank money, which is the bottom layer, M0. That possibly will become central bank digital currencies. The process has started. Then you have commercial bank money, which is actually deposits. So most of the money in the economy is actually commercial bank money. It's not central bank money. Central bank money that we interact with is only paper money or coin and currency. So if the deposits are going to be the primary source of money in the industry, that has to come from tokenized deposits. Obviously, you can also have stable coins exist, but stable coins do suck up a lot of high quality liquid assets. So if you have stable coins that are backed by treasuries and then they really start to grow, there's only so many treasuries to go around, high quality treasuries, whether they're US or Singapore or elsewhere. So I think ultimately banks will need to find a way to take their deposits and tokenize them on blockchains, public and private. I think that does a couple of things. One is it keeps the fractional reserving system in place. So you can actually make sure that the capital rules work, every other rule kind of operates. And our approach in this thing, at least from JP Morgan point of view, has been not to invent new things. And we have enough things to go around. It's actually how do you make the thing a lot more potent with new technology. And I think the other thing which does is it does become, when you tokenize it, it becomes more of a bearer instrument. So JPM coin, which we have already, is actually an account-based structure, not a token-based structure. But a token-based structure is much more movable, much more sort of open to doing DVP, et cetera. So that's the long-term sort of path, at least the way we see it from a banking point of view. But a lot of, obviously, regulators, a lot of, sort of lawmakers, et cetera, have to get more clear on this. So I think that's a longer journey.
All right, so turning over to Kui Juan, if you can speak about this concept of permissioning, how does it quite work? And also, I think there's a question as well. Sounds like TradFi is rehashing and remapping what is already being done today with what's done with DeFi. So what are we really trying to solve? How is that different? How does the permissioning concept really work?
So I think if you look at what we talk about, a permissioned DeFi for institutional players to trade with each other, permission means that the wallets that are going to be used for trading needs to be verified. And that is important because for us, we need to know who are our counterparties. And it has all sorts of regulatory issues that goes behind that if we trade with people that we don't know, especially in the area of AML, CFT. And so permission is very important. Now, the solution behind it can be varied, and one of the ways that we thought about it at DBS is simply just to use a token. So if you've got a bunch of people, could be banks, could be non-banks, who plays the role of verifying who you are. And once you're verified per the KYC standards, a token will be issued to you, and you carry that token into your smart contract, and you'll be verified by the other participants. So by that, it means that you're now trading with people whom you know that are verified as legitimate parties that you can deal with inside the pool. So in that sense, it's permission, but using the blockchain, public blockchain for the transactions to be recorded so that it can be at scale. And when you think about, the other question is around, are we reinventing stuff? The answer is yes and no. I wouldn't say that it is a bifurcation between DeFi and TradFi world and therefore we're copying. It is not. At the end of the day, it is the technology. What does DeFi do? DeFi, it's about AMM, it's about wallets trading against each other and using smart contract and write it onto a public blockchain. So this is what would be the core components of DeFi at the very basic. What we're saying is we want to use that same technology but apply the current trading activities that you would do in the TradFi world, but leveraging the efficiency that you're going to get off this technology. And that will help with a lot of operational efficiency that you see today, and as well as settlement risk. Because today, in the TradFi world, if a transaction is done, and there's a news that says XYZ is actually in default, everybody down the chain will basically say, freeze the transactions, and then you get issues of domino effect on the risk that gets created. But in the case of using DeFi protocol, the atomic settlement allows you to just exchange instantly, and everybody else in between doesn't get affected. So I think that in itself is the usefulness that we see in mitigating some of these risks, especially when you have issues of institutions going belly up under whatever the conditions are.
So Kui Juan, can I be more obnoxious than that? I guess, why not? Which is, what's the total market cap of crypto? 1 trillion, give or take.
Yep. Give or take.
Probably a little less. We move 10 trillion a day. So I think it's less a case of like we are trying to take over DeFi. I think it's just a case of like some grown-ups getting into the room now. Yeah.
So Fernando, looks like there's a lot of interest in identity solution. So I'm turning over to you because I think you're involved in quite a number of these open source, open standards identity solutions. But if you can just speak about possible identity solution, I think the audience is quite interested as well. How do you kind of have this sense of accountability, but some level of privacy, anonymity? So if you can speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'd like to say that there's some really cool technology out there. Self-sovereign identity, verifiable credentials, you name it. But in many cases, it's a solution looking for a problem, right? I think as an industry, we need to do a better job at defining what we are trying to accomplish here. And let me get into the nitty-gritty. And let me use some niche terminology here. Let me show my geeky side, if you don't mind. So you need to define things like identity assurance level, right? Do you want us as people to come to a branch to physically, be KYC'd, or do you think that is overkill? If you're not willing to go that far, maybe your identity assurance level is not, is not the highest, right? It's something in between. And once you have been KYC'd, ideally you want to keep using that services that you KYC'd for. Let's say to make a payment, whatever that is, right? Is it going to be recurring? So you want to have a way to authenticate yourself. So then it becomes the issue of what's the level of authenticator assurance that we want, right? Do we want to do two-factor authentication, three-factor, deal with biometrics, you name it. And even if you have that in place, right, ideally you don't want to KYC yourself every single time or use many different authorization solutions, right? That's why you have federation. And then we need to define as an industry what's the level of federation assurance that we want.
So if I can turn over to Uma and then Khuijwan as well, just to get your perspective. I think there's interest as well. With the pilot that's happening, what's next? What can the industry expect?
I mean, obviously, we'll grow the pilot. We want to move forward on tokenized deposits. We also want to figure out what the identity solution is. So in this one, again, to build on what Fernando was saying, what we did was we actually had this concept of verifiable credentials. So you actually issue the credential to someone that they have it in their wallet, and that credential can actually not only authenticate who the person is, but it authenticates who they work for. So I'm a trader, I work for JP Morgan, and then it possibly can even have limits. So it can say, I can take a risk limit up to $100,000 on any given day. So a lot of those things are, by the way, already done in TradFi, but the new technology allows us to encapsulate in a way where now you go and interact to some DeFi protocol, an AMM or whatever, that can actually rely on that because they know that it's a credential they can verify, has these properties, cannot be changed because it's cryptographically created. So they can't, no one can fake it. So I think that's one. But from our point of view, I think the two paths forward are tokenized deposits and identity, and pushing on both of those. I don't think if I go back to Project Ubin, I know it's been a while since we talked about it. I mean, Project Ubin was another project that the MAS launched. We were part of it for probably 5 years, various cycles. DBS was part of it as well. And I think that's what ended up creating a company called Partier, which is now, alive and well in Singapore. But I think now, as innovation speeds up, I don't foresee 5 years of Guardian. I foresee 1 year, maybe we do one more thing, and then we basically work with our respective regulators and then say, how do we take it to production? So I think we are pretty highly convinced that this is the path to the future. As Fernando says, this is a sneak peek into what the future might look like.
Maybe adding to, I think the standardization is going to be key, especially around identity. In our case, I want to be fully transparent, right? We are going to be working with the OpenID Foundation. That's our goal. We were the first company in Japan to have a FAPI SIBA compliant authentication or authorization. But we feel there are some missing pieces to achieve the level of identity assurance that we want and to be able to do the authentication the way we want. So you will see us contributing back to all the relevant open source projects, right? And also contributing to all the different committees at the OpenID Foundation and potentially others. In other ways, we are going to be scratching our own itch. Things don't just happen, right? If you have an issue with something that is open, it can be open source, it can be an open standard, go and fix it. Please, I ask the whole audience to do that, right? You have an issue, a problem to solve, and I can tell you from experience, right, that all this community would embrace such contributions, right? And that's going to be our approach, Alan, going forward.
All right. So
for me, I think the next step that we're going to do would be three things. One is, as I've shared, looking at how we can improve on the AMM protocol, because that's really, really important. In the real world of TradFi for the trading, there are many different ways to price a transaction. And the current AMM protocols out there are not sophisticated enough. So there's a lot of work to be done there. Secondly, obviously, is to get the rest of the industry participants to come in and take a look at what we have done and really understand it, especially the reimagination of what the financial market infrastructure will be. Because this is going to be quite revolutionary if it is done at scale. And I think the third one is something that all of you in the room would probably know that it needs to be done, is we need clarity around definition of what digital assets is, the ownership behind it, and as well as the legitimacy of smart contract when it gets done. I think legally these things are still yet to be clearly defined, and these are work that has to be done with the regulators, with the lawmakers, to ensure that they understand that these are the things that needs clarification, and once that is done, then you get everybody else coming in on top of understanding the technology behind it. So I think those are the three things that we have to do. And then I think, finally, what would be really, really interesting is, to Uma's point earlier about Patio. Patio is a company that provides blockchain technology for instant cross-border settlement. It will also provide, in time to come, FX PVP and DVP. And how do we use technology like this to work with the DeFi protocol that we have done and really create a holistic ecosystem will also be quite exciting.
Right, so I guess Guardian, we announced it in sometime in June publicly, and getting there to a live transaction, set of live transactions, I guess this week.
Yep.
It's quite a bit of a progress. But I guess there's what I'm hearing from you is that there's still some more way to go, including getting additional scope, additional testing, and clarity on some of these other issues. Well, today, just for interest as well to the audience, we've also announced additional participants focusing on different areas, one of which is trade finance with Standard Chartered Bank leading that initiative. The other one's around wealth management products with HSBC and UOB coming in as well. So I think net of it, the group is open to more participation, more ideas. I think together we can really use this as a platform to learn and extend this in a meaningful way. If I can just go right around, I think we have about a minute left. If I can just get some words of advice from each one of you, starting with you, Fernando, and finishing off with Uma.
Yeah, I said before, please scratch your own itch. We need more partners. We need to reach this critical mass. That is a requirement, right, for this to be real. We want to create standards. We want to have enough, liquidity. We create a DeFi pool, and for that we need like-minded partners who know what it takes to build the future and build an utility effectively. This is not pets.com, right? We do care if the financial system goes down, right? So please join the effort.
So I'll say reimagination of the financial market infrastructure is what we are about to embark on. And we welcome all TradFi and DeFi participants and crypto players to join us in this journey, because I think it's going to be one big, exciting journey, and we will reimagine how trading is done.
Yeah, and I would just say, I think it's shoot for the stars. Let's try to do something that's never been done before, because if it's just incremental, then what's the point?
All right, with that, thank you very much, and thank the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.